Hello ladies and gents, this is the third of 6 interviews recorded for the Making of GoldenEye. I'll be uploading these in the order in which they were recorded. This time I'm talking to Mark Edmonds, credited as Director of Photography. Mark was the gameplay and engine programmer for the game. We talk about life before Rare, the XBLA version, Perfect Dark, and of course the development of GoldenEye. If you haven't watched the Making of GoldenEye, I recommend watching that first, as it's better hearing from all 6 developers together on the development of the game. I'm no professional interviewer, so again this is quite informal, but Mark gives some fascinating insights into the programming side of the development. I've edited out some pleasantries at the start, so we'll dive right into the questions. Enjoy. Before we get to the actual GoldenEye and Rare, can you tell me a bit about what your background was prior to working there and how you actually came to work at Rare?
Right. Yeah. So I studied maths at university, but I'd always been into playing games for years and years, ever since I was really young. And so after getting a degree, I then tried to get into gaming. So I applied to a few companies, but because I didn't have any programming experience, so nothing worked out at that time. So I got a job working for a medical company, just programming for them for 3 years, and then after that I decided, let's try getting into games again. And it's so I used to read Edge magazine. And I think Donkey Kong was really big at the time and on the cover and stuff like that. And so Rare had an advert in the magazine. So I just applied and went for an interview, and they said come and work for us. So that was really good.
Brilliant. So what was your first project when you started there?
So GoldenEye was the first thing that I worked on. But so to start with, so Rare was set up in a farmhouse, which you probably know, and there were different barns. So there was the main farmhouse, and there were different barns which different teams were in, working on different games. So to start with, for the first month probably, I was just in the main farmhouse, in a little room upstairs, and they asked me to work on some graphics stuff, just working on the PC for animating a character and creating skinned joints. So I had no idea what it was going to be used for or whatever. So that was working with Martin Hollis at that time. So he asked me to work on this. So he obviously had a plan in his head of what he wanted to do with it. And then after a while, so I guess that was going okay. And so then I moved over to the barn, the GoldenEye barn. So it was just, so I think Martin and Carl were over there at the time. So then, so I moved over to join them.
So in the credits, I think you're credited as Director of Photography. Is that right?
Probably quite a few of the names are a bit weird, aren't they?
Just sort of, it's kind of a randomly assigned title. But in your bio, it says Gameplay and Engine Programmer, which is probably more accurate, I'd assume.
So I think probably in the credits, the titles were probably just based off things that you might find in a film, just because it fitted with the game. So I did a lot of work on the engine, just on the underlying code.
So what were your thoughts at the time moving over to the the GoldenEye barn, as you called it? Were you a big Bond fan, or?
So I've watched all the films. I wasn't a huge fan, but I enjoyed watching James Bond. I'd just grown up watching them all. So but I know some of the people who joined the team later were like really big James Bond fans.
I think to a degree, being British, it's kind of something you always watched at Christmas and all that anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is just such a cool universe and franchise.
So whether you were a huge fan or not, it is a big franchise. Obviously, was that did that bring with it any apprehension or anything like that?
Strange. So I don't think it did. Probably to anyone. I don't know if anyone felt under pressure or anything from it. But maybe just because none of us were experienced and really knew what it was like, so we were just like, "Oh, this is cool. We're going to work on James Bond, so yeah, let's just give it a go." And yeah, and I guess the company trusted us just to get on with it. So, and that probably instilled trust in us, or confidence in us.
So when you joined the team, was it already a first-person shooter, or was it still at this stage an on-rails thing?
So it would have been so there wasn't anything running at that stage at all. But the plan for it was going to be an on-rails shooter, basically like Time Crisis, Virtua Cop. But yeah, and then it just slowly evolved, because Doom was on PC, was like big at the time, and we were all playing it, and so it just sort of moved towards that over time.
So how does that kind of work if you're doing programming and engine stuff, and then you've got people designing the levels, and then obviously working out the objectives and missions and what have you? Is that kind of a lot of bouncing off of each other to work it all out, or?
Yeah, so people would have been throwing ideas around. And that was, so I think Rare was probably used to working in that kind of way, where you would try ideas and iterate, and so you try something, is that good? If it's not, then you just do something else instead. And when you find something that's good, then you keep going with it. I think that process probably came from Nintendo as well, because I think that's how they work on all their games. It's really from trying things and iterating on ideas that you find out what's really good for the player and what's fun. So then talking about the levels, so Carl was building those, and I think pretty much Martin so Carl had a background as an architect. Well, yeah. So did you speak to him like
I spoke to
a couple
Carl,
of weeks
yeah.
ago? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think Martin basically said to him, make some realistic levels. So there wasn't necessarily a big plan for what the levels should be, but it was. So Carl was, as far as I remember, he was just making whatever he wanted, but for it to be realistic, building on his background.
So you're saying there that the just trying things and seeing what works. So did you play a lot of it during the process of developing?
Yes. I mean, so everyone there. So the only way for us to test things in the game, so it was running on development kits. So just to like test the graphics, you'd have to run the game on your development console, and then so you'd be running around, almost playing it, just to look around that level. So when I was putting new code features in, then so I'd then just run the game on the dev kit and try them out and see what it was like. So it would have been quite a long time until we were then actually getting enemies in the game that were reacting to you. So it would have built up quite slowly to start with. because we were just building everything from scratch. So it would have been just getting some graphics on screen first of all. So like some of the basics, like the very basic thing, it would just be getting one triangle just displayed on the middle of the screen, like rotating or something, and then trying to get some graphics in that Carl had built, and then being able to move around, and then getting things like collisions happening, so you couldn't walk through walls. Yeah, and then some AIs at some point as well, or some enemies that would react and try and shoot you, and that you could shoot. So it just built up over quite a long time.
So so in terms of hardware, you were using the SGI. Is it the Onyx? Were you using?
So yeah, so a couple of the artists had those. That was it was like quite a boxy silicon graphics, I think.
So that's for the artwork, is it primarily?
Yeah. So So I vaguely remember probably Carl and Brett had those. They were probably the really expensive ones, like £400,000 or something, if I remember right. If those are the ones, I think we had two of those, which is just crazy when you think about the price. Yeah.
So with the development kits, at what point did you actually get a Nintendo 64 controller?
That's a good question. It would have, it wasn't there at the start, because I remember. So Martin had probably been on trips to Japan where he may have seen it before, but I do remember this thing of when Rare first got one, it was in a box, so the only way you could use it was by putting your hands inside this box, so no one could see what it was or something. Pretty sure. Oh, and then and then I remember another version, which was a controller from another console.
Was it Saturn? Maybe Saturn.
Could have been, and it had some like holes drilled into it, and the actual stick attached to that. So it was so Nintendo were still working on it, obviously, to come up with a final design and stuff. So so maybe that was probably with like a controller with like the two handles that you would hold, whereas the one that Nintendo then actually ended up with was the one with the three handles. Which is quite odd when you think about it now. But
yeah, I mean it's certainly unusual. But I think do you know what? I think it's a terrible controller, but I do love it for GoldenEye, and I still enjoy using that control scheme for GoldenEye. But did much change when you actually got that final controller in terms of, changing the how the game controlled and everything?
It's difficult to remember exactly how the process went, but so I guess the main thing was that there was just the one stick, although we would have known that at the time, and it was trying to. So obviously the big game on Nintendo 64 was Mario 64, so everyone was going to be using that controller to play Mario. And they would be used to how that felt. So I remember that was one of the things that we talked about, that to try and make the controls in GoldenEye feel familiar to someone who was used to playing Mario. And so that was basically using one hand on the center prom or whatever it is, using the stick, so you could move around, just using that single hand, and then also so it was quite good because the trigger was underneath, so it felt quite like holding a gun. Although one of the things was that different people would either hold it with their left hand on the center stick or with their right hand. So I always preferred it with the right hand.
Wow. Then you've only got the D-pad on the left side, really, haven't you, and no buttons?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that's actually how I preferred to use it, I think. I'm pretty sure, yeah. but
Wow,
for quite a few people to prefer it with the left hand. But yeah.
interesting. So, did you, from sort of the programming side, did you have a bit of creative freedom with the game, or was Martin like really specific about what he wanted with everything? Or
So I think a lot of it, there was a lot of freedom, basically. Um, so we knew that, I mean, everyone knew the overall goal. So, well, although that changed. So, yeah. So it started off as an on rails thing. So we knew we had to get shooting going. Um, and so we knew we had to get enemies going. Um, yeah, and then it was just a case of slowly, bit by bit, working on each feature. I mean, so we would all discuss things anyway, and take the best ideas. Um, and I'm sure there were a lot of things that we tried, and then they didn't work, so we had to ditch them and try other ways of doing them. Um, yeah, and a lot of it was just trying to make things actually fit on the Nintendo 64 as well, just because it was, yeah. So you couldn't put in loads of polygons, so it was just making sure that everything was cheap enough to run. And even then, it ended up running at quite a slow frame rate compared to modern games. But yeah.
yeah, I think it was. I mean, it would have been what 12 meg max. I think that cartridge.
I can't remember
Yeah,
the size now, but it seems crazy,
yeah.
when you talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Graham was saying that they had to fit all the music and sound effects into 700K or something. And he talked about having to sort of I don't want to say dumb it down, but you know what I mean, like
I'm sure.
make it
Yeah,
fit.
yeah. I'm sure. I'm right. Yeah. So yeah. So I remember they were doing some things on the audio side, like reusing. Yeah. Well, they had to do things in a cheap way. Yeah, like reusing sounds. I think probably within multiple parts of the tunes and stuff like that.
So I mean, from a music perspective, I kind of understand that how that works, and from an artistic perspective, I certainly understand how it works. But in terms of programming, what kind of limitations does that actually mean, for a layman like me?
Right. So, um, so two things come to mind. So one thing was, which Martin Hollis was working on. Um, so he worked on a virtual memory system for Nintendo 64. So quite similar, probably. So he was like really technical on the programming side, more technical than me. Yeah. So I wouldn't have had a clue to how to do this, but so but I guess it runs similarly to virtual memory on a PC now. And it was basically some parts of the game code would swap in and out of the memory depending on what was running at that time. And so he did that system just to save memory, so it could be used on other things. So maybe the intro sequence to the game. So that would load in at the start, and it would probably unload later on when you're actually in a level. Yeah. So things. So things like the weapon, the well, okay, yeah. So there are certain techniques that you can use in programming. So you basically pre-allocate chunks of memory, which can be used for various things. So you might say, what's the total number of characters, enemies that you can have on a level? And so you allocate a chunk of memory for that. So there would be a chunk of memory allocated for the player's weapon. And so basically then you'd have to better load the graphics for any weapon into that same fixed sized chunk of memory. So yeah, so it was basically large enough to load in whatever was the most expensive weapon. And then I think whenever the camera switched to an external perspective, so third person, then instead of loading the weapon into that memory, it would load the graphics for the player character for James Bond into that memory. Yeah, so that's like another little trick, because so you'd either be displaying the first person weapon, or you'd be displaying the third person view of James Bond. There was yes, another trick was so basically using like a scripting system for the AIs, for the enemies, which was a lot cheaper than doing it in C code itself. So it's basically just like a list of instructions, but just very simple, like byte data. So it's so it's just like a very simple programming language, but it took up less memory. So that was another thing.
So with the programming, the AI and all that, what's involved with it when the motion capture's done for all the the rolls and the little funny little hops and everything? How does that actually get translated into the enemy AI?
Oh God, yeah. Let's see if I can remember. So things like the movement. So things like just walking around. I think we came up with a few of those scripted commands, which would just say, so you could tell an AI, go to this point on a level, or go to where the player is, or run away from where the player is. So just a few simple cases. And so maybe we would have had a command like jump to the side, and which would then play one of the jump animations. And then so David Doak, who was basically then taking these commands that I did, and so he would then create a script for an AI which would say, so if he wanted to have an AI which could jump to the side to dodge you, then he would probably just every so often put in a command saying dodge to the side, and he would probably just set it on a random chance to happen just every so often. And sometimes it would happen and it would look quite good, and sometimes it would happen and it wouldn't look good. But you probably tend to remember the times that it did look good, and so just using some random combinations of things, you could maybe make the enemies seem more like they were thinking more than they actually were.
So was part of it actually the enemy AI reacting to certain things, and then some of it was like a lottery of they can do one of this set number of things?
So some of it would be in a lottery. So some things, like some of the scientists, you would aim at them and then they would react in a particular way, So the actual enemies themselves, I'm not sure. Yeah, so you'd have to ask Dave if he put any things in there, particular ones. But a lot of it was quite custom on different levels, I think. So.
All right.
He would basically sit there playing a level, seeing what was good. This is what I remember anyway. So, and then he would then tune and tweak the AIs and their spawn points and how, like the size of their hearing radius, how well they could hear the player and things like that. And so he would just continually play through a level, tuning it and improving it each time. So.
Interesting. And I guess part of that is the amount of sound that each weapon makes, and then the radius of that. Right?
Yeah, so I think there was like so each time you fired, then it would just create a larger circle around you, and depending on the loudness of the weapon as well. And when that touched an AI, then they would hear you and then come looking for you. Yeah, so it's fairly simple. Yeah, I think, pretty sure it was actually Chris Tilston who suggested that to me. I mean, I didn't have any experience doing that sort of thing, but yeah, it seemed to work quite well.
Yeah, I didn't really realise how that works. That is interesting.
So how did you think it worked?
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, in all honesty. I mean, I've probably thought about it at some point, like, you know, but I assume every game does it slightly differently, maybe.
Yeah, although probably they are all fairly similar-ish.
So obviously it ended up coming out quite a way after the film.
Yeah.
which was very unusual. I mean, in all circumstances, it's an unusual licensed game. You know, it's good, which is unusual for a licensed game. But yeah, what were the kind of pushbacks from obviously the intended release date? I assume was somewhere near the film.
Yeah, it must have been originally. So I think the original plan was that it would have been made on the Super Nintendo in the rendered style of Donkey Kong. So I don't know if that was then intended to come out at the release of the film. But then, so Martin really wanted to make the game on the Nintendo 64, so that was when it was decided to make it for that instead. Can you remember when the film came out?
Film, I think I want to say 95.
Right. So we would have started. So I started work at Rare at the start of '95. So it would have been maybe the original SNES version. It was intended to come out with the release of the film.
Right.
But I can't see any way that would have been possible for the Nintendo 64 with it being a new console. But maybe then the intention was to come out as close as possible, maybe at the end of '96, but then obviously maybe in the middle of '96. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, I obviously never did, so because it got delayed, and then it came out August '97, I think. And even that is probably not an ideal time to release, because it's like all the big titles always come out around Thanksgiving time in the US. So maybe it was intended to come out Thanksgiving '96 at some point, and we must have missed that. So it would have come out August '97. But yeah, it seemed to work out all right in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was early '97 that you guys added the multiplayer, March maybe. I'm sure someone said that. But
it did happen fairly late. I mean, I think we had talked about it for a while, and sort of made plans to allow for it on the code side, so that we could run multiple screens. So we could run split screen, and we could have multiple player characters as well. But neither Martin or I would have had time to work on that. So when Steve joined, he you could basically work on that and get it all going, and and it turned out that it was really fun to play. So so it was well worth waiting for that to all go in and be finished. And,
yeah, absolutely. So that didn't affect you then, the late edition, because you'd already kind of made an allowance for the space, or?
So, I mean, obviously, so there was a lot added because there were like all the different game modes. So there was lots of custom things that needed to be done on the gameplay side. But I guess on the engine side, I have a feeling that it may not have been that bad, but I can't remember. So, I mean, it was, obviously the frame rate was slower with 4 players, just because having to render the background, but at least then there weren't any AI enemies, so it was just the 4 players.
How about the cheats? Were they, at what point do you remember when the cheats, the times for each level, when that was added in?
So the times, I can't remember. So the actual cheats themselves must have been added in pretty late. Just people coming up with ideas for things that it would be fun for the players to earn. So the times, I'm not sure. I mean, so I can remember when the values for the times were being decided, so how hard to make each time for the particular levels. I mean, that was done. Well, so it had to be done right near the end of testing, when the levels were actually complete, and so the really hard ones would basically came down to, it's like you'd find the best, whichever tester, either at Rare or Nintendo, who could get through that level the fastest, and so the fastest times were based on those. So you knew it was someone really good who was getting a really fast time, and so it would be really hard to get. But with players actually having, as long as they wanted to learn how to play the levels, and hopefully they would be able to achieve the same sorts of times.
Do you ever watch any of the speed runners doing GoldenEye?
I've seen some of them, and it's they are just so good. I mean, they are just as but I imagine the testers at Rare and Nintendo are doing the same sorts of thing as well. So.
Yeah, I mean there are a couple of quite pretty tough times in there, I think. Yeah.
Was it the Aztec one? Was that one of the hardest times? Yeah, I can't remember. But there were some. Yeah, there were some hard ones.
So were you involved in presenting at E3 or any of that for GoldenEye?
So I never had to present anything. So the whole team did go to E3 one time. I mean, so Rare tended to send teams to E3 or other things like that, just as like a bonus for the team, just to keep everyone happy or whatever, and have a few days, have a good time, enjoy yourselves, and then come back and finish the game or whatever. So
do you remember if that was a 96 or 97? Or I know it's a long time ago, but
I can't remember. I remember going to a few different E3s, so I can't remember which ones I went to now. I'm sure, I may well have gone to the 96 and 97.
Because I've seen footage of one of them. I think it was the 97, and the Nintendo booth is just Rare everything, all Rare games, not just GoldenEye.
yeah, I mean, Rare was just in a really golden streak at that time. Yeah, I mean, just only just behind. So obviously Nintendo were the biggest, producing all the main games, and then it was Rare after that. Yeah, and they were just working like hand in hand together, and just having all this success. So yeah, it was just amazing time. But
So when you were there, like, obviously your first proper game you're working on is GoldenEye. Did you realize how important that relationship was?
between Rare and Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, and how important to Nintendo it was, especially for the N64.
Well, so not at the start, no. But maybe over time, might have realised. I mean, just when you started seeing, how successful the Rare games were. Yeah, and so I vaguely remember that they would try to stagger the Rare and Nintendo games. So there was always one, so they would come out at different times, and there was always like one to look forward to, that kind of thing. So
that's interesting. So do you remember any kind of public reaction to the game before release at things like E3?
to GoldenEye. So
yeah.
So I think probably in 96. Well, so one of them. So I just remember the reception being not that amazing, just because in that kind of environment, so you're in this hall, just loads of people around you, just tons of noise, and you don't really get to experience the games as you would sitting at home, and yeah, probably going off like previous games made about films. Probably no one had high expectations or anything like that. So yeah, so it wasn't really until later and started getting some good reviews that we thought, oh, okay, maybe people do like it. So
yeah, it's a weird one because it was. I mean, the reviews were great straight out of the gate, but then I think they didn't make enough copies, and that resulted in people not being able to buy it, obviously. But it then sold really well for like 2 more Christmases, I think.
it did keep going. I mean, the thing I remember is, so in the States they had rental charts for all the different games. So like renting out cartridges for the weekend or whatever was a really big thing over there, and they just had these rental charts going, and it just seemed to go on for months. Where GoldenEye was always like the highest rental, and so presumably people just keep renting it to play multiplayer. Yeah, so that was always really cool to hear about.
I think it might have topped Blockbuster for 2 years.
Really?
I'm sure that's the figure, 2 years, which is incredible. And I believe they even gave them to Blockbuster sort of, or the rental places for free, and said, if you don't like it, you can send it back, and none of them came back.
Oh, it could have been, yeah. So maybe Nintendo just gave them the copies and said, yeah, try and rent these out.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I mean, obviously huge success then. What are your thoughts on the continued success, and people still want to talk about GoldenEye and people still want to play GoldenEye?
Yeah, it's slightly weird that people keep coming back, but yeah, it's like my memory of the whole thing just gets dimmer and dimmer over time. So yeah, it gets harder to remember it. But it's always nice remembering, but it is quite a long time ago now. Yeah. So have you seen the stuff recently about the GoldenEye XBLA, Xbox Live Arcade version? Yeah. So I got to work on that at Rare as well, which was really cool, except then it never got released. But then there was this leak a few weeks ago from God knows where. Someone had an old copy. So yeah, so that's interesting to see again. Although I think in my memory the two versions, the original and the Xbox Live Arcade version, have sort of merged together.
Right.
Yeah, but so it's only really when you see that graphic switching again between the two versions that you remember. Oh yes, okay. The original GoldenEye, the graphics were just really low res.
Looks jolly nice, that Xbox One.
Yeah. See, in my mind, that's almost what the original looked like, but until I was reminded. But yeah,
So was that fully finished?
pretty much, yes. Yeah, it was really close. I mean, you could play through the whole game, and I'm pretty sure the multiplayer over Xbox Live worked as well.
So what happened with that? Was that a licensing issue why it didn't release, or?
It would have. There are so many parties involved with the James Bond license, and particularly that game. So I think the James Bond license was probably owned by Activision at that time, but then Nintendo owned the original game and the original license. Yeah, and then Rare obviously had made the game and whatever. So I know and Microsoft wanted it on their console. So yeah, so at some point we thought all the parties had agreed and it was all going to go ahead and everyone was happy. But then at some point, just so right at the end, it wasn't, and someone didn't want it released. So yeah, as soon as one person says no, then that's it. So you can't.
Shame.
Yeah, yeah, it would have been good if it had released at the time, but yeah, but it's interesting to see it out there now and be reminded of it.
So was it quite different when Microsoft took over?
At Rare, yeah, it would have changed over time. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. They had different priorities. I mean, it seems like it's just completely changed now from what it was originally, because I mean, as far as I know, they're just making Sea of Thieves probably now. I don't know. Yeah, so they're basically just a one game going on at a time, whereas for Microsoft there would have been 5, 6, 7 games for just really small teams. But then I guess the whole quality of production of games has just increased over the years. So now you need the big teams. Yeah, I mean, Microsoft are just looking for these big franchises for Xbox that they can, that they can show off and know that players want to come and play and will come onto Xbox for. So.
Yeah, I mean, during the N64 era, it's pretty much defined, certainly for me, by Rare games. You know, two of my favourites, GoldenEye and Diddy Kong Racing. I played that to death, and preferred it to Mario Kart. So it's like, you know, it's really synonymous, that Rare name, with that console for me, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, so one of the things that Rare did try to do. So when you think about it, so they would take a good game that was out there, and then look for ways to improve on that and make it better. Yeah, so they did try to do that with a lot of the games. So yeah, so Diddy Kong trying to improve on Mario Kart. Yeah, and then like Donkey Kong and Cameo trying to improve on Mario, that kind of thing.
So what did you work on immediately after GoldenEye?
Right, that's a good question. So, so there was probably there was a decision. No. So that's a fairly easy one actually. So we would have. So the team would have known we were staying together, so we would have had a bit of a downtime, I guess, just trying different things, making plans, and we would all have then have moved on to Perfect Dark 64, but the question really was, were we going to make another James Bond game, or were we going to make something else? And I think probably most of the team quite wanted to make our own game, and it ended up that we probably wouldn't have been able to get the license anyway for the next James Bond game. So yeah, so we probably didn't have that much choice. Yeah, because so probably the license for the next one, I think, was just gone up to some astronomical price. Yeah.
Well, funnily enough, I mean, before GoldenEye, the film and the game, the Bond license was, pretty down in favour. And I think, obviously, to a degree, the film, certainly your game, was responsible for the price after GoldenEye of the Bond game license.
Yeah, I don't know how much it changed, but yeah.
But that's good, right? You got to use your own imagination for Perfect Dark.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so the core game obviously is pretty much the same. So yeah, first-person shooter. But yeah, so I mean, I didn't have that much input into the universe. I'm pretty sure a lot of that was coming from Dave and Duncan, Martin, and then later on, so when new people came on the team, they would have worked on it as well. But yeah.
So does it use the expansion pack, Perfect Dark?
Yeah, so I think it pretty much has to, apart from in multiplayer, I think.
So does that just mean you've got more to work with?
Yeah, it wasn't intended, but just because of the development and the trouble we had along the way, we ended up in a situation where, yeah. So during development, we were using the expansion packs in the dev consoles just to allow us to do things, or to make the development easier. And then it ended up that we'd added so much to the game that it was impossible to run without an expansion pack. And yeah, so we thought we were pretty screwed. But it turned out that Nintendo there was some game that then I think, was it Zelda, that they were intending to release only with the expansion pack as well. And so yeah, so it turned out to be fairly lucky for us that we could release Perfect Dark and say you needed to run the expansion pack for this. Yeah. Although, yeah, just trying to think.
I'm trying to think which games actually ended up using it. Because I know Donkey Kong 64 did, because it came, there's like a bundle with the expansion pack. But other than those two, I'm not sure.
Probably quite a lot of the last games on the console maybe would have used it. I can't remember either exactly which ones. Yeah, I mean, so it did limit the market, so the number of people. Yeah, because not everyone would have an expansion pack, but yeah, but it was just something that.
Did you go on to work on the Perfect Dark sequel then?
So I did in the end. So yeah, so after working on Perfect Dark, I had enough of Perfect Dark at that time. But a lot of the team were really keen to then go on and do the sequel. So most of the team then went on to the sequel, and I went off and did something else for a bit. But then it ended up where they needed someone to do the networking for Perfect Dark Zero, and I'd been working on some networking, so I'd had a break from Perfect Dark. So it was then. So I then came back on to do the networking on Perfect Dark Zero. So yeah, so it worked out okay as well.
I think that's probably my questions, as certainly as far as GoldenEye's concerned.
Cool. Yeah.
But yeah, that was really interesting because I think the programming side of things is the thing that I understand the least. And it was interesting, some of the stuff you were saying about how some of that works.
Yeah, there's just a ton of hidden stuff going on in the code side of all games. Yeah, that people just don't realize. Yeah, and like all the tools as well, which no one ever sees. And it's like, yeah, some programmers written all the different, like the graphics tools, the music tools, all that sort of thing. So yeah, there's just loads.
So when you, like, let's say, if it's, for example, GoldenEye, if you're starting out, do you have some tools available, or in the case of the N64, because it was new, is everything from scratch?
So yeah, for GoldenEye, there's pretty much nothing you could. So there was so the artists were using Alias, which became Maya, for creating. So there were some tools for the artists, but there wasn't a pipeline for how to get the graphics and display them on the console. Yeah, so I did a lot of that, basically converting graphics, converting animations into a format, so that they could actually be used on the console. But then there were no like level editors for setting up enemies on a level. So we just kludged together some makeshift system. So using there's a program called Multigen. So Nintendo had their own version called Ningen. It was basically some sort of terrain system, almost for, I'm not sure what it's used for, maybe for flight simulators or things like that. But so we were using that to set up the levels, position things on the levels. And if any of the designers or artists remember this, they'll probably just have nightmares, because it was just such a horrible system compared to like all the modern. So compared to things like Unreal Engine or Unity, I mean, they just make the whole process seamless now, and just light years ahead of what we were working with at the time. I'm pretty sure when we started on the Nintendo 64, there wasn't even a proper debugger for the code. So the only way to debug things was to display text on the screen saying where you were in the code, things like that. So
what was it like developing for the N64 in relation to other consoles or computers or whatever you've worked on since?
Right. Well, so at the time, so I hadn't worked on other consoles, so I didn't have a clue. It's like, we've just got to make the best of this, and this is what we got. But yeah, but things just improve over time. I mean, the tools now are just completely different from what was then. Yeah, I mean, so just looking at Unreal Engine and Unity, they just make developing games so much easier. And yeah, and so they run on all the consoles now.
So that's like an entire toolkit, sort of, is it?
Yeah, it's like level editors. Yeah, I mean, so they're both free to download as well for like casual developers. But you can load in graphics from different graphics packages, load in audio, sounds, and then you can. So I'm pretty sure they both have like a visual scripting system as well. So even if you're not a programmer, then you can still get things on the level to do different things. So you can get things to move around. Yeah, I mean, so they have samples. You can just, so you run one of these editors, and you can just load in a sample, which is a first-person shooter sample, and you're just in this little room, and you can like move around straight away and shoot these like little balls and things like that. So, yeah.
Amazing.
I'm just admiring your shelf actually with GoldenEye.
Yeah, I do have GoldenEye there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been playing. So you must have had a load of consoles.
Yeah, I've got quite a few. Yeah. Yeah, I've got the N64 there set up, and all the Sega stuff. I love my Mega Drive, and I mean I've got all sorts.
Mega Drive. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
I've got an Amiga here. I've got BBC Micro, Vectrex. Yeah, all sorts.
Really cool collection. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun. But I do love GoldenEye. Like I said earlier, I do play GoldenEye. I've been playing it recently, actually. Just get myself in that headspace. But
cool.
I do absolutely love it. Honestly, I love it. The multiplayer is great, and got probably thousands of hours spent playing that in my youth. But I do love the campaign and the the challenge and everything. Because it's still, even though I must have completed it God knows how many times, but it's still tough doing that 00 agent.
Yeah, some of those really are tough. Yeah, particularly again, the Aztec, I remember on 00 Agent, was probably just the hardest one. But
have you seen, I saw online, there's they worked out you can blow up Baron Samedi by placing mines in certain places before he loads in. So it goes to the cutscene, and there's like a chain reaction, and it kills him.
Oh, that's quite cool. Yeah. I haven't seen that, but yeah, that's really cool.
So thanks so much for talking to us. That was really, really interesting. You want to tell us anything you've got going on, or you want me to stick any links anywhere for anyone?
Not really. I mean, I'm working on a game at the moment, but for a company in Barcelona. Have you heard of Smilegate at all?
No.
Yeah. So I wasn't familiar with them either, but they're a Korean company, and they've got a really successful. Well, they've got a few successful games. One of them is called Crossfire, which is probably the most successful first-person shooter, because it's really popular in Korea and China.
Wow.
And just because of the market sizes, they just sell, they just make so much money from that. Yeah. So, but they've got a studio in Barcelona. So I'm doing some work for them at the moment. But,
awesome.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
So that's all remote, obviously. Is it from UK? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm probably about half the studio there are actually working in the office, and the other half are probably working from home anyway at the moment. So, yeah.
I think it's the situation for a lot of us at the moment. Anyway, so
hopefully it'll end soon. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty done with it now.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you've got any other questions you want to ask, then just get back to me as well. So.
Thank you. I will. Stuff might pop up because, as I said, because I don't understand all that stuff as well, I'm probably missing questions that I should have asked. So if I do think of any, I'll chuck you message.
Yeah, just let me know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Pleasure to talk to anyone who made one of my favourite games.
Cool.
And yeah, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, cool. It's good to speak to anyone who enjoyed playing it. So yeah,
Thank you.
revisit those memories.
Indeed. All right, I'll let you go, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
And
Yep, I'll see you.
yeah, have a good night.
Yeah,
Cheers.
and you. Bye.
Ciao.